Hello, freaks, geeks, degenerates, votniks, and scrufftards. Welcome to the War Zone. I'm Scruffy, and this is Scruffy Tales. And in this video, early morning hours here, uh, we are gonna take a look at how Russian sources are admitting that Ukraine is completely dominating the battlefield in Sumy Oblast, and by extension, the battlefields in and around Tetkino in Glushkovo Rayon in Kursk Oblast. Uh, Interesting read, to say the least, finding out what the Russian sources think about what's going on in Sumy. So let's head on over to what the Russians are saying, and then we're gonna take a look at the maps, what all of that entails. So I mean, take a look at this. This has been making the rounds now among YouTubers and what have you. But we have to highlight this. Take a look at this now. A little more detail about what is happening in the Sumy direction. This is a Russian saying all this. A black day for the Marines. In Mariupol, the 810th Brigade was hit hard. Many were killed, and about a platoon was captured. And a little less than a platoon, but yeah. And then we had to leave Andriivka. This we already know. The 155th Marine Brigade, the 150th, they are having a bad track record in this war, these guys. Oh my god. They were unable to correct what the command of the 30th whatever allowed. Andriivka is completely under the control of the, well, here you have some slurs, Russian slurs for Ukrainians. There's also a fighting for Alexivka. This is the Russian name for a Ukrainian town that is right next to Andriivka, as far as I can figure it. No changes in Yunakovka, that big settlement. But now we're trying to hold our positions rather than move forward. So they've pushed in, they can't push any further, and now Ukraine is stepping things up and pushing back, but the Russians are holding. And this is interesting. Near Tetkino, the commanders are driving. I assume this is a road or a highway from Glushkovo along the railroad to the treatment facilities. But damn, first solve the problem with the drones. So many people have already been killed for no reason. Really interesting. And this is the really interesting part. Take a look at this. And also how tired I am of their aviation. They fly like the Jews in Iran. Now, what? See, they're not afraid of anything. And their accuracy has increased. Something definitely needs to be done here. What is this a reference to? So Israel used their F-35s, the stealth fighters, to fly into Iran, and they are hitting targets with impunity, or without Iran being able to retaliate because of the F-35s, the stealth, and everything, right? So what he's saying here is that the Ukrainians are operating damn near at air superiority efficiency, according to this guy. So maybe he's exaggerating, but it does appear as if Ukraine has achieved air parity in Sumy and the border region with Kursk. Right? That is what he's saying. If not air superiority, then definitely air parity. Russian anti-air installations, anti-air defenses are unable to deal with the Ukrainian Air Force. And they are accurate in their attack runs. They are not afraid of anything. Right? This is incredibly important and really, really interesting, because this gives Ukraine a tremendous advantage along this section of the front line. In Sumy and in Kursk, Ukraine appears to have achieved air parity at minimum. And that is incredible, and that will give Ukraine a massive advantage taking the fight to Russians in this area, in this section of along this section of the front line. Now let's head on over to the maps and try and figure out what all of this means for the maps and where troops are located and what have you. So starting off with Andrew's map, Sumy Oblast and the Russian incursion, and things have been happening in over here in Andriivka, here at the Oleksiivka. The Russians have another name for it. What was it? Aleksiivka, I think, right? So in Ukraine it's Oleksiivka. So Andriivka, Oleksiivka has been mentioned, Yunakivka has been mentioned, and Myropilya has been mentioned. And this is where the Russian source says that Ukraine took not casualties, they took POWs, a platoon worth of POWs, and they also inflicted a lot of heavy casualties on the Russians trying to push in towards Myropilya. So in this area, maybe up on the border, maybe around this small, I don't see any village, so I guess this is a farm hidden away somewhere here in the bushes, here in the trees. Alexandria. So somewhere around this farm is where that more than likely took place, and this is where the 21st Mechanized appears to be operating, according to the Ukraine control map. The 21st Mechanized is of course famous for being one of Ukraine's, or was at least one of Ukraine's more elite units. It had the best tanks and the best infantry fighting vehicles and the best armored personnel carriers. We're talking STRV 122, Leopard 2A6, two extremely capable tanks. The 21st Mechanized had the Swedish CV9040, the best infantry fighting vehicle in the entire war. And they also had Polish Rosomak APCs with 25mm guns, extremely capable APCs. So the 21st Mechanized was, or has been up until this point, a very extremely elite unit for the Ukrainians, the best armored formation in the entire war. It's safe to say, and they took a whole lot of casualties when they took part in the Kursk incursion. That has to be said. So therefore, I am a bit. I don't really know what the status is for the 21st Mechanized. How many CV90s they lost in Kursk, how many tanks and so on. But the 21st Mechanized is. At least still on paper, a very extremely powerful Ukrainian force, and was definitely the most capable armored formation in the entire war, up until recently at least. And they are operating here at Myropilya, according to Ukraine control map. So they could have, so that unit might have been involved in dealing these heavy casualties on the advancing Russians and taking those prisoners, potentially, over here at Myropilya. Now we're gonna be heading over to my map to take a look what's happening in this part of the battlefield here. So here we are. I'm gonna zoom in. So the Russians, they admit that Andriivka is under complete Ukrainian control. We already knew this. They are also saying that Aleksiivka, to them in Ukraine, it's Oleksiivka, is under attack. It's being contested. The Ukrainians are pushing in. It's a bit unclear what the situation is in the town, so I've marked it as entirely contested, because we don't know. We're gonna have to wait and see what the mappers say after a couple of days here. But Ukraine has taken Andriivka and they are applying pressure to Oleksivka. It's not the most easily assaulted town. Ukraine basically has one approach point with cover, and that is coming in straight from the south. And maybe if they secure these windbreaks, they can also come in from the west here. But you still end up in this part of town, and then have to fight your way north along the main street, unless you want to cross all these wide open fields with vehicles, that is. Ukraine has the option of maybe coming in this way following the windbreaks or the tree lines that follows this road. But still, surrounding it, wide open areas, difficult target or a difficult objective to reach for the Ukrainians. My gut feeling is that if they are attacking, it's from the south, trying to come in here, securing a foothold down here, and then grinding their way forward along the main street here in towards the center of town. Seems the most logical approach. So that is what the Russians are admitting happening. Andriivka completely under Ukrainian control after a big counter push. Now they are counter pushing into Oleksivka. And they also mention Yunakivka, that Russia is no longer advancing and that Ukraine is now building up momentum to counterattack. Where the lines are a bit unclear. I think Mayakovsk 73 made some updates on where the Russians may be holding the line a bit down here. This part might actually be under Russian control, to be perfectly honest, but they haven't secured the entirety of the town, and now the battle lines are drawn and it's time for Ukraine to more than likely begin pushing back to liberate the town. So that is what the Russians are admitting going on. And they are struggling. Like I've said, Ukraine knew Russia would be pushing in here eventually. They have more than likely pre-sighted the entire area to be able to call in accurate artillery strikes all over the place. And they are now countering, having, seen the Russians move in. They've hit them with accurate artillery fire, and they are now counterattacking, more specifically here in the center around Andriivka and Oleksivka. So the Russians stepped into a trap, and Syrsky is now closing the trap and absolutely crushing the Russians by the looks of it here in Sumy Oblast. But we also have news from Tetkino, like we saw. That commanders are leaving Tetkino and heading for medical facilities. And there's a massive drone issue here in Tetkino. And if we take a look at the NASA maps, the entire area is just burning according to the NASA firm maps that highlights fires and what have you. So Ukraine is well and truly pushing in this area. They want Tetkino. And by all accounts, the Russians are struggling and suffering, and Ukraine is close to achieving their objectives of pushing into Tetkino. And this is when it gets interesting, because Syrsky has said that Ukraine controls 90 square kilometers in Kursk Oblast. And so I made a mess of it a bit. Well, my entire previous video was a bit of a mess. But I messed up measuring out the square kilometers. So I'm going to try and make a better job of it this time. So let's head on over to the deep state map. Right, so Syrsky claims that Ukraine controls 90 square kilometers in Kursk Oblast. So if we take a look at the Tetkino area, officially Ukraine does not control the entirety of Tetkino. This part here is roughly 40-45 square kilometers. So as you can see, if you want to reach 90 square kilometers, you need to expand Ukrainian territory that they control. They have territory here right up to the river. They took control of this piece of land during the Kursk incursion. Russia left this piece of terrain and blew up all the bridges, and Ukraine has been in control of it ever since. So if we add that in, and then add all of the territory here at Tetkino, plus this area here, Andrew Perpetua was first to point this out, that this area might be contested, or it is contested on his map. So if we add that to the territory that Ukraine might actually be controlling, then you get roughly 70 to 75 square kilometers in the Tetkino area. Still not 90 square kilometers, but Ukraine is contesting this part here, this corner, along with a small village or farm called Novi Put. So that is roughly another 8 square kilometers. If we move over here, Ukraine is still holding on to some territory in and around Gornal here. Roughly another 8 square kilometers if we take a look at the territory right here on the border. And of course, it doesn't show on the deep state map, but this is also part of Kursk Oblast, and Ukraine has pushed across the border here and are holding some forests on the Russian side of the border here. So adding up these smaller incursions into Kursk Oblast along the border here with this larger battle space around Tetkino, you get roughly 90 square kilometers. And that suggests, if Syrskyi is not bullshitting us, that Ukraine is more or less in control of Tetkino in its entirety, instead of these pockets spread out along the outskirts of the town. So my map for the Tetkino area, here we have the incursions over to the east. If you add in this entire corner, you get roughly 8 square kilometers. So Ukraine might have actually left this forested area here and pushed out. There has been airstrikes made by Ukraine, talking about the airstrikes, in these windbreaks. So they may have actually followed those airstrikes and secured this corner, gaining another 8 square kilometers. Andrew Perpetua has on his map this part of the battlefield as contested. So Ukraine might actually have pushed in from Beshalivka, crossing the border and securing the windbreaks here. And so that might give Ukraine some more square kilometers. And we know that Ukraine is contesting the factory in the middle of town, indicating that they have pushed up through town here between the factory and the border. They can push past the woods here to contest the factory. Russian mill bloggers have been for a couple of weeks been very worried that Ukraine have been close to encircling Tetkino, indicating that they are pushing up towards the main road leading into town. So all of this combined with what Syrskyi now has said seems to indicate that Ukraine are at least contesting the entirety of the town. Maybe not being in full control, but they are contesting. They've pushed across, past the wide open spaces outside of town, and they're in the town, operating, fighting along basically almost every street, and the Russians are suffering. Going by what Syrskyi claims and what the Russians are saying, and what the maps are showing us, where Ukraine is in control and where they are pushing to contest. So really interesting. So this is definitely a section of the front line where Ukraine has the upper hand, and I think a lot of it is based on air parity. Ukraine can move in with their aircraft, potentially F-16s and Mirages, and just hammer Russian positions with accurate airstrikes. So Andrew's map, here you can see how Ukraine is contesting that part of the battlefield outside of east of the Tetkino, right? And you can also see north of it how areas are being contested. This is where the Ukrainian Air Force is operating boldly and taking the fight to the Russians, not afraid of anything, according to the Russian sources, and they're striking Russian positions with an increased accuracy. And of course, this is also where Russia lost at Su-35, potentially thanks to a Saab early warning and control aircraft assisting a F-16 to get close. The F-16 dropped the AMRAAM and then left, and then the Saab aircraft provided flight data to the AMRAAM missile so that it just flew in towards the target without requiring radar lock, and then it locked on when it was within the guaranteed kill zone, and managed to take out the Russian fighter in that way. That is the rumor, at least. I don't think we have anything confirmed what actually happened. It's safe to say that an F-16 was in the area, dropped the missile, and the missile connected with the target. So that happened outside of Koronevo. This is where the Russian fighter crashed. So this is an area where the Ukrainians are successful in contesting the airspace over the battlefield. And I think it's safe to say that Ukraine has air parity in this part of the front line. Sumy Oblast, the border region between Sumy Oblast and Kursk Oblast. And I mean, Tetkino has been hit by airstrikes for over a year, to be honest. This factory area, as we can see, contested here, has been hit time and time again by Ukrainian airstrikes. Like I said, Ukraine, they knew Russia would follow them out of Kursk into Sumy, so they have more than likely prepared targets, fire missions all over the place here, and they are just calling into the artillery and to the Air Force, we need bombs on this exact location. And the Air Force, they know exactly where to go to hit those positions accurately. It has been prepared beforehand, and we're seeing the effects now when the Russians are complaining about the accuracy from the Ukrainians. And it's really interesting that the Russians are struggling with actively combating Ukrainian fighters in the area here. I wonder why that is. Are they lacking air defenses, or are the Ukrainians just that good in flying low to avoid being detected, to avoid being shot at, getting in close to drop bombs in these strike missions, and getting the hell out of Dodge before the Russians can do anything about it? It's also an indication that Russian fighter jets, interceptors, can't operate effectively in the area either. Russia cannot fly in with interceptors to hunt down F-16s on strike missions. So the Russians are clearly having great respect for Ukrainian air defenses in the area here. They can't fly in and intercept incoming F-16s even if they know they're coming. So something is going on here in the air war along the border between Kursk and Sumy, and whatever it is, Russia is not the dominating force in the skies over here around Sumy and Kursk. Ukraine clearly has the advantage here. Russia cannot hunt down Ukrainian aircraft. Russia cannot prevent Ukrainian airstrikes, and the boys on the ground, the Russians on the ground, they are complaining about the amount of airstrikes aimed at them and the accuracy of those airstrikes. And all of this might actually have a greater impact on the war, not just on the operational level, potentially even on the strategical level, because in January of 2025, Syrskyi said that Russia had lost some 40,000 troops, dead and wounded, in pushing Ukraine back in Kursk. And Russia at the time had some 60,000 troops in Kursk. So during those first 6 months of conflict in the Kursk Oblast, Russia had allocated in total 100,000 troops to the area. 100,000 troops taken from elsewhere along the front line that had been moved up to Kursk. And now we're 6 months in, closing in on 7 months. Russia must have lost something similar, right? Maybe not 40,000, but at least 30, at least 20 to 30,000 more casualties in this area here, right? So they must have moved even more troops into the area to maintain that stable number of roughly 50,000, 55,000 troops that were used to push in to Sumy Oblast, right? And now Ukraine is pushing back the Russians, taking prisoners of war and inflicting massive amounts of casualties. They have more than likely surrounded and isolated Tetkino, pushing in, hunting down Russians in the town. It is a massacre. This forces Russia to allocate even more troops to the area to maintain pressure in Sumy Oblast and to be able to effectively fight over in the Tetkino area. So we're going to see more and more troops being moved from down here up here to continue the fighting in Kursk and Sumy, especially if Ukraine establishes a presence within Russia itself. Then Russia will have to address this issue. They have to move troops to fill the gaps in the line, to replenish numbers and what have you. And they also have to move resources and assets away from the war down in Ukraine up to Kursk to support the units fighting up here. So this is, I mean, that is why Ukraine pushed into Kursk to begin with, to draw troops away from the war going on within Ukraine and have the Russians tie up and lock down and, have troops and resources and supplies and what have you tied up in Russia instead of in Ukraine. And they're continuing to doing it. Grinding away on the Russian forces Russia to move more and more assets up into Kursk, away from Ukraine and into Russia. And now with Ukraine having air parity in this part of the battlefield, they can inflict more damage and they can push the Russians back even further, and they can apply even more pressure in Glushkovo Rayon in Kursk and secure Tetkino, forcing Russia to move more troops, exposing those troops to the Ukrainian Air Force. And I mean, it becomes a vicious circle for the Russians. It's a meat grinder, literally. And that meat grinder needs meat, and that meat is going to come from the rest of the front line. So I'm thinking that this the Kursk operation is still having a massive impact on the war at large. Syrskyi said that the Kursk incursion is more than likely one reason why the Russians haven't been able to isolate and push into Pokrovsk at this point in time. Because remember, 100,000 troops in January had been moved in total to Kursk. And by now we're looking at, what, 150,000 maybe, if not more, having been moved to the Kursk region in total. So obviously, if you had these 100,000, 150,000 troops down here assisting in the push towards Pokrovsk, things would have been very different indeed. And if the Vatniks are going to go, haha, they have pulled all their best units away from the front line and Russia's advancing. I'm going to repeat this. I'm going to keep repeating this because the Vatniks, they need to hear it. In 2 years' time, Russia will secure 1% of Ukrainian territory. In September of 2023, Russia began the assault on Avdiivka in earnest. And that assault on Avdiivka led to the push towards Ocheretune, and that led to the assault towards Pokrovsk. Right? So, when summer is over in 2025, Russia has moved for 2 years from Avdiivka to Pokrovsk. And the territory they have gained in those 2 years is 1% of Ukrainian territory. And that includes territory gained up here. That includes territory secured in Kursk Oblast, for fuck's sake. So 2 years of hard fighting for the Russians, and they have secured 1% in total of Ukrainian territory. So if you think the Kursk incursion was insignificant, think again. And Russia is now forced to move even more manpower away from Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, up into Russia, and they are now trapped in Russia and they can't operate in full force in Ukraine. Compared to if Ukraine had not attacked Kursk, then all of these assets would have been down here and making life difficult for the Ukrainians to hold the line in and around the Pokrovsk area. Right? So this operation is having a tremendous impact on the strategical situation for the entire war effort for both armies. And it's currently working in Ukraine's favor. Absolutely. The Kursk incursion is a masterpiece. It's quite clear that Syrskyi has outsmarted the Russians when he designed the Kursk incursion and designed the eventual defense of Sumy Oblast, knowing that the Russians would follow the Ukrainians across the border. And that's it. That's gonna have to be it. I hope you found it interesting. I hope I'll see you in the next one. There were some issues with my previous videos. Gonna do a test and see if those issues return. But overall, that's gonna be it. As always, go på marsch, Ukraine, and give them hell.
Smoke in my lungs, ashes in the sky. I walk through hell just to watch you die. Blood on my hands burns like the devil's brand. Heavy is the weight of a warrior's last stand. Loaded guns, heart of stone. Bring the fire, reap what's sown. The trenches are grave, night burns red. I fight for the living, leave nothing unsaid. Heroium slava. Shadows whisper, scream my name. A nightmare born of this bloody game. Enemy's face twists, my soul is black. I press forward, no time to look back. Loaded guns, heart of stone. Bring the fire, reap what's sown. The trenches are grave, night burns red. I fight for the living, leave nothing unsaid. Heroium slava. blood-stained hands can't wash away the scars of war that always stay. But in this hell I find my worth, a shield for those of fragile birth. Dark skies whisper you're all alone, but the echoes of brothers lost scream that I am home. Hellfire trails behind my name, death or victory, it's all the same. For the innocents I give my all, in the ashes let the tyrants burn it full. Loaded guns, heart of stone, bring the fire, reap what's sown. The trenches are gray,